Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking a really fascinating and I think critical look at some of that feel-good messaging out there. Specifically, how the logic behind a very persistent self-help philosophy has sort of quietly snuck into the world of aspirational travel.
Right. It's a really interesting connection.
Yeah, and the listener who sent this over gave us some excerpts from an author, Roberta, who has this decades-long grievance against the law of attraction, LOA.
And her point is that it never really went away after the early 2000s.
Exactly. It just got a makeover. It sort of traded its vision board for a digital nomad visa.
And that core flawed logic is now popping up as mindset coaching.
Mindset coaching to get you to. Just go. So we're diving deep into her argument that this super optimistic messaging, it subtly shifts the blame onto people.
For circumstances that are just not in their control, structurally, financially, physically.
And what's so compelling is that the author's dislike for this goes back 25 years. So she has a serious foundation for spotting it again now.
Yeah, she saw the original blueprint.
So the mission for today is pretty clear. What was the original sin of the LOA logic? And why does it feel so weirdly familiar when we read today's travel slogans?
Well, the core thesis from Hill is that the law of attraction isn't hated because it's optimistic.
Right.
It's hated because it has this deeply cruel mechanism built into it. It quietly blames people for things they didn't choose.
So if you don't get what you visualized,
the fault is yours. And she argues that today's aspirational travel advice carries the exact same toxic idea, the same scent, the same logic, just applied to geography instead of, say, a promotion.
that immediately changes the conversation. It's not about is optimism good? It's about the emotional dishonesty of a philosophy that demands belief, no matter what reality is.
It sets up failure as a moral problem.
Okay, let's start there with that original problem. When Roberta Hill first ran into the LOA all those years ago, what was the mechanism she found so insidious in phrases like think positive or visualize abundance?
The mechanism is really simple. It's the promise of absolute control.
Yeah.
The LOA offers you this kind of deal, a covenant, that says if you meet the standard of belief, you get the reward.
But the problem, I assume, is when the reward doesn't show up.
That's the fascinating and kind of awful part. The philosophy itself has no mechanism for external failure. It doesn't compute.
So it's always on you.
It is always on you. If you visualize that job but don't get it, or you visualize wealth but you get a chronic illness,
Yeah.
the failure is immediately put back on the individual.
And the explanation is?
You didn't believe hard enough, or you attracted the wrong outcome, or maybe you just weren't aligned.
So the empowerment is conditional. It works if you succeed, but it totally blames you if, life happens.
Precisely. The author has a great term for this. She calls it moralizing luck.
Moralizing luck. I like that.
Yeah. It takes all the random, structural, chaotic parts of life, which is where most of our success and struggles actually come from, and it reframes them as a moral failing.
So if you're poor, you just weren't positive enough.
Or if you're sick, you must have invited that bad energy. It's a very harsh logic.
It is, but it tracks with the rhetoric. So what about something like a serious health issue? How does that moralizing luck apply there?
That's a prime example. The pressure to manifest healing. If someone with a chronic condition doesn't get better, the LOA framework suggests they're failing to maintain a positive frequency.
I see.
It completely ignores the biological reality, the financial costs, everything, and instead says they must be choosing this negative outcome because their belief isn't strong enough.
It removes compassion and just replaces it with a test of willpower.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what does this logic have to ignore to even function? Because as she says, life is definitely not a vision board.
It ignores everything that makes life complex. I mean, structural things like inequality or borders. It ignores money, debt, family responsibilities.
Yeah, stuff.
And critically, the reality of aging in the physical body. It ignores that, sometimes a good thing happens to a lazy person and a terrible thing happens to a really hardworking, positive person.
Right, randomness.
Yeah. She says this mindset is deeply uncomfortable with complexity. It demands certainty where humility would be more honest. It just forces everything into a simple belief versus non-belief box.
And in doing that, it turns these huge structural limits, like the power of your passport or your bank account, into a personal failure to believe.
Exactly.
It sounds like it just strips away all the nuance of being human.
Yeah.
And all you're left with is this thin layer of willpower.
Yeah.
So if the logic is that flawed, how did it manage to survive and hitch a ride with people packing for a trip.
Well, that's the pivot.
Okay, so let's make that pivot. Where does the scent of this blame
Yeah.
show up in the, the modern, very aesthetic world of travel advice? What phrases does the author point to?
It is everywhere, especially on social media. We see that same covenant, that same deal, just disguised as a motivational phrase like, if you want it badly enough, you'll find a way.
And the hidden part is, if you don't find a way, you just didn't want it badly enough.
The blame is baked right in. And other examples are full of this moral judgment. Don't let fear limit you.
Which implies that any caution is just cowardice.
Totally. And she also calls out the more spiritual language like, the universe rewards brave travelers. And of course, the big one, just say yes and the rest will work out.
Those slogans sound like simple calls to action, but based on what we've said, they carry this huge unspoken assumption about risk.
Yes. The author sees someone with a completely different risk calculation than most people. This messaging assumes everyone has the same safety net.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a lot of disposable income, just saying yes and losing a deposit it's nothing. If you live paycheck to paycheck, it could be a disaster.
So the advice isn't dangerous because it encourages travel.
Yeah.
It's dangerous because it encourages, well, irresponsibility disguised as bravery.
Mm-hmm.
And it judges you for being prudent.
Exactly. And that's where the blame mechanism connects directly. The author says when travel advice becomes mindset correction, it gets toxic.
Right.
The messaging is clear. If you're not going, you must be afraid. If you can't afford it, you must be limiting yourself.
It reframes a logistical barrier as a psychological flaw. Not traveling isn't a failure of courage, but this logic insists it has to be.
Yep. She calls it law of attraction logic in hiking boots. It's the same old story. Ignore objective reality, your debt, your visa, your body, and just focus on positive belief.
It's basically saying, if you're not living this amazing mobile life like me, you must lack the moral fiber to do it.
It reduces a huge, complex decision to a simple test of willpower. And if you fail, it's your fault for not being brave.
And it completely erases the possibility that someone just made a rational, mature trade-off between wanderlust and responsibility.
There's no room for that.
Let's deepen the dive into what this philosophy is actively erasing. The source has this brilliant outline comparing the LOA fantasy to structural reality.
The contrast is really stark.
So the LOA thinking says desire creates reality, but what does that ignore?
It fundamentally ignores structural constraints,
And you have mindset over matter.
which dangerously overlooks the physical realities of bodies, health, and aging.
And what about fear is the obstacle?
That willfully dismisses the truth that sometimes prudence is just wisdom.
And finally, the big one. You attract your outcomes.
Which just wipes out the massive influence of randomness and pure luck.
I think we need to spend a minute on structural constraints. For someone who hears just go, what realities does that phrase just steamroll over?
It steamrolls everything that, as she says, turns privilege into a philosophy.
Ah, that's a great line.
It is. Travel is shaped by cold, hard facts. Money, of course, but also geopolitics, like the power of your passport. A citizen from a wealthy country can just go into dozens of places, no problem.
But for someone else from a developing nation, it's a bureaucratic nightmare of visa applications and scrutiny.
Right. And what about physical capacity? Mindset over matter feels especially cruel there. It is. It's awful advice for someone with a mobility issue or a condition that needs reliable medical care. It ignores that travel gets exponentially harder and more expensive the more complex your health is.
So the enthusiastic traveler using these slogans is basically taking the ease afforded by their passport or their health.
And presenting it as a universal mindset trick that anyone can access if they just believe.
And that's the subtle cruelty. It looks at someone whose visa was denied or whose health limits them, and it implies the barrier is internal, a lack of drive, not a lack of access.
It just invalidates their real struggle.
Which leads to the other key point here, the dismissal of restraint. The LOA only has language for more, for desire. What does the author say about choosing not to travel?
The culture today implies that if you choose fewer trips, or travel slowly, or even just stay home, you must be shrinking your life, lacking imagination. But Hill argues that choosing restraint, maybe staying home to pay down debt, or traveling slowly because you know your body's limits, that often indicates clarity, not fear.
So sometimes the most rational decision is simply not to go.
Absolutely. And this kind of advice has no framework for valuing that rational choice. It only celebrates impulse.
This is why she says we need to trust judgment over belief.
And discernment over raw desire. She says she trusts people who admit to the trade-offs, not the ones who promise transformation.
So what does good, honest travel advice look like compared to the LOA hype?
It's advice that's grounded in financial and physical honesty. Good advice doesn't say, if you want it, it'll happen.
Right.
Good advice says, here's what it actually costs, financially, physically, emotionally, and here's how I decided to manage those very real risks.
It replaces that false certainty of manifestation with the humble truth of logistics and priorities.
And that, she argues, is infinitely more valuable. And to connect all these threads back for you, the listener, the source's big pushback against the law of attraction and its new travel persona is really a plea for authenticity.
Yeah.
These philosophies just flatten the complex, beautiful, and often unfair human experience into these simple, marketable slogans.
And they replace genuine curiosity with this artificial certainty that everything will just work out for you.
Mm-hmm.
And that certainty is the problem. It replaces compassion for other people's real lives
Yeah.
with the cheerful demand that all limits are self-imposed.
Right.
The ultimate takeaway from Roberta Hill is that travel is not a manifestation exercise. It is, quite simply, a negotiation with reality.
And that reality, unlike your vision board, does not care how badly you want something. It's completely indifferent to your positive thoughts.
Which brings us to the final challenging thought for you to take away from this. It's the realization that travel doesn't owe you anything. It doesn't exist to validate us. It doesn't reward bravery or punish hesitation. Sometimes a trip or the choice to stay home is just a reflection of where you are in your life, based on facts.
And you have to consider if accepting that grounded honesty is, in the end, more satisfying than clinging to a promise of transformation that the universe was never going to deliver anyway.